There we go. He's talking rubbish nowadays. Well, I say rubbish. It's the standpoint of the Chinese capitalist, basically, that what he's saying is that if you got a free country, someone like Jack Ma would be free to say whatever they like and do whatever they like. And as a multi-billionaire, one of the richest in the world, he would be able to. I thought that was you.
Oh, Red Hat.
I thought it was you. Red Hat on Red Hat.
Yeah, I was going to say it.
What's going on?
He just found a piece, so he can't be.
We're twins.
He just loves you, man.
Oh. Yeah, so the idea is that the Chinese should have multi-billionaires who can shape politics however they like because they've got the money. And that's what we saw in America. Now, you might agree with it, you might disagree with it, but in America, one minute. In America,
Oh man, I'm praying for him. What do you mean in a minute?
I'm just talking, that's why.
I'm praying for him.
I know, but I'm standing
Pray
here.
for people.
Yeah, of course they do. He needs a lot of praying for him. I agree with that one. I don't agree with Donald Trump. I don't agree with his immigration policy. I understand where it's coming from, but I don't agree with it. I don't agree with the tariff policy, which is basically America first, that's the idea, to try and pander to the working classes of America who've lost their jobs, lost their hope, and the middle classes, lost their jobs, lost their hope. At the same time, to try and rebalance the world economic system. The problem why manufacturing doesn't operate in America and has moved to China, the problem why industry in America is on its knees compared with much of the world, is a long-term historical problem of capitalist investment. It's not caused by China, it's not caused by India, it's not caused by Mexico, unlike what my friend over here, Alan, says. The Chinese didn't cause America's problems. China economically grew precisely for the reason that he criticizes, because they have large-scale industries in public ownership. And those industries, if you've got the banks in public ownership, they're talking about taking British steel into public ownership again from the Chinese, funnily enough. If you've got the steel industry, the coal industry, the railways, aeroplanes, airports, coal, steel, electricity, gas, water supply, if you've got those in public ownership, then you can make them act as one single body, not just separate entities, all fighting for their own interests. You can make them act as one body. And because you make them act as one body, you can say, we are going to set a series of priorities for society. It could be you say, we want a very high level of technical skill amongst 18-year-olds to be able to use computers and artificial intelligence. It could be you say, we want a large number of people who are physically fit to be able to do farm work. Could be you say, we want a large number of people, to be able to run a hospitality industry. Whatever it would be, you could allocate resources and mobilize resources from the banks, from transportation to property and all the rest. Mobilize those resources as one force to achieve your objective. That is why China has overtaken America. That's why they overtook America in terms of production. People turned around and said, I was in various Marxist and political groups and so on, and they all turned around about 2010, they all said, China is now capitalist, it's the same as everywhere else. And I said it's not. Turned out I'm right, they're wrong. China has been able to develop economically. Why? Because once you've got these publicly owned organizations, and you say, we're going to invest in, I don't know, let's say building an entertainment center at Speaker's Corner. You spend the money on that, and around that gather all these different smaller private entities. Every time they lay on Winter Wonderland here, all the Romanians come down here selling these bubbly things with lights in them, right? So the state sector, if there's a large-scale mobilization of capital, small capital gathers around it, like a magnet pulls iron filings behind it. That's how the Chinese economy functions. And that's why, they've been able to become the manufacturing center of the world, and America has fallen behind. What's going to happen? Let's say they protect American industry. What does it mean? Internally in America, the big companies will do better than the small companies. the small companies are dependent on importing raw material. I mean, think of the amount of people who work in America selling things on eBay they buy from China. Now the price of those things is going to go through the roof. Only the large-scale corporations who can organise the transfer of goods on a large scale will be able. It's the centralised power in America internally behind big corporations that control the society. And you see the other aspect to it, this is where Piers and me will agree fully, is the other aspect to this is that companies like Palantir and the artificial intelligence agencies, they are sweeping up control over the future of knowledge. Whatever we've got now, they've had 5 or 10 years ago. And they've been able to exercise, if you like, expand their power across the entire planet to a surveillance and killing machine that is unprecedented in history. There is a building, Palantir's headquarters in the UK is based in Soho Square. And there was a UN representative went in there a few weeks back, made a report, and he said, I went into one of the command rooms at Palantir's headquarters in Soho Square. There's like one of these things from a sci-fi movie, a giant screen on there showing all the kill spots in Ukraine, which the Americans and Palantir are targeting for Ukrainians to blow up, you know. And it's the same with Israel and Palestine. And so what's happening in Palestine is basically our future. This is what they're saying. What they're doing there with their technology is how they will control countries in future. Cities, any urban discontent, urban guerrilla warfare, urban unrest that is significant, they will control using drones, using artificial intelligence to monitor public sentiment like they did during the lockdown period under COVID. They claimed they were checking up on the people. They would monitor. They had the 77th Brigade of the British military intelligence monitoring people like this, particularly this man here, monitoring the anti-lockdown protests. And they declared at one time, you may remember, I think it was Priti Patel, she said the anti-lockdown protesters, she said, should be treated like terrorists. People who are, I think it was you who was done for breaking some of the testing kits. Was it you?
No, it's your
Angela, okay, Angela. Angela, done for breaking some of the testing kits. Debbie Hicks, a friend of ours, she went into an empty hospital in 2020 with a camera, and she was charged with crimes for this, for the offence of filming an empty hospital. The offence of filming an empty hospital. And now, of course, drip by drip, everything that we said about what was happening at the time has become a reality. And now all the mainstream media and many mainstream pundits like Piers Morgan and co, now they also, oh, we knew this at the time. I was a little bit scared about it, but we knew it at the time. Unlike these mad anti-vaxxers who were screaming and shouting lies on the street. I mean, even every now and again, they still come out with this shit in the news. You know, the anti-vaxxers, oh yeah, but don't listen to them. The anti-vaxxers, those lunatics. No. So, our friend over here, Alan, has gone full anti-China. Well, is China really your enemy? That's what you have to ask yourself. Because they are prepping the world for war against China. That's what the game is. They have to be strong enough to do so, though. And America at the moment is not strong enough to do so. And America has two forces that it's dealing with. One is they want to first undermine the easy enemy. And the easy enemy is the European Union. Because the European Union is composed of all disintegrating and separately pulling directions. It's got Germany and France at the core. They've got a lot of things they don't agree on. And then all around it, it's got smaller countries that are tied in one way or another with Germany or France. With the Mediterranean countries, Italy, Spain, Portugal, more closely aligned with France, and France having interest in North Africa and the Mediterranean region, and Germany in the North European countries and Eastern Europe. So the natural tendency is for the conflict between France and Germany to emerge, but only it will emerge first of all about conflicts between these smaller nation states within Europe. And the Americans will play on them, as they have done with the Ukraine issue. Don't forget, back in 2014, the Ukraine war began as a conflict on what was called the Maidan Square, where the Americans and the Europeans collaborated in overthrowing the democratically elected government in 2014 in the Maidan Square. They orchestrated some fake massacres carried out by intelligence agencies on behalf of the Ukrainian right sector. In other words, a genuinely fascist unit like the Azov Battalion. They carried out massacres on both sides during that period of the Maidan protests, and then they used that as an excuse to overthrow the government, and that led to the breakup and splintering of Ukraine. And now the Americans, the Europeans have been pushing to get involved in Ukraine. In 2014, the Secretary of State, what's her name, Nuland, she said, you know what, there was a recorded phone conversation that was leaked, and she said, you know what, fuck the Europeans, right? And that was what it was essentially about. They were battling for control of Ukraine, the Europeans and the Americans, and so it is today. You know, when Donald Trump made, slapped Zelensky around the head and told him, you know, basically you're an idiot, behave yourself, I thought it was most amusing. When he did that, the Europeans, led by Keir Starmer, charged up and said, we'll take command. We're in favour of Ukraine. We'll defend Ukraine to the death. We'll mobilise the young people of Europe and England to go and fight in Ukraine. We'll send soldiers to Ukraine. We'll protect Ukraine. We'll spend money on Ukraine. We'll spend money on weapons. The Germans said they're going to create an army. The British are going to prepare their army to go to Ukraine. But as soon as the Americans said, you need to make a deal, Zelensky came running back. So clearly nothing the Europeans said could convince the Ukrainians that they were going to fight in any meaningful way. And therefore this is a weakening of Europe vis-a-vis America. The Americans now are pushing even harder. They turn around to Zelensky now. They're not turning around to Russia and saying, we're going to seize your territory, we're going to seize your property. They're turning around to the Ukrainians. First they said, we want a deal on the rare earth metals. Now they're saying, we want all of the property in Ukraine. So clearly, Zelensky is just a puppet on behalf of the Americans, who they can kick whenever they want. And now he knows the Russians have got no reason for making a deal, because the Russians are clearly winning on the battlefield. They've got no possible reason for trying to make a deal with Zelensky and co. Trump has been, if you like, snubbed by Putin. And of course he doesn't have a go at him, because he knows he's going to have to still make a deal with Putin. And Putin can accept or reject American occupation of the resources of Ukraine. His latest move was try and get control of the gas pipeline going through Ukraine over to Europe. So the Americans want to break up Europe in order to strengthen their position in the world. Then I think they'll delay any war with China, but that's what they're preparing for. They're preparing for a cyber war with China. That's effectively what it is. In other words, they will use the latest technologies developed in Ukraine, developed in Gaza, and developed over the next few years, the latest technologies for warfare, economic, military, technological. In other words, if you send viruses into someone else's computer system, you can undermine their economy. You know, we'll look at the Heathrow Airport. They only need one power station out and the whole of Heathrow Airport's closed. I mean, you can't make it up, can you? How farcical they are. Was that?
I think it was a game.
Well, whether it's a game or not, it's either here or there. The point is they're vulnerable. The vulnerabilities have been exposed by what happened. And every system, every corporate, economic and military system is basically structured around a certain information infrastructure. There is a software model of every single system that operates. That's why, for example, you know, when the bank goes down or a website goes down, you know, you're in big trouble, aren't you? That's why people say keep cash. You should still circulate money so people know if the system breaks down, you can still function. But the truth is, most of the world's institutions are controlled by software models that if they break down, then that society, at least temporarily, is driven to a barbaric state. And that's why technological warfare, which will involve both software, destruction of software models, and also the direct military targeting of other people, like the Israelis did yesterday, blowing up, they just said to them, they phoned up the doctors in the hospital, you see this in the news? Phoned up the doctors in the hospital and said, clear out the ICU unit and the emergency department, because we're just about to blow you up. You got 20 minutes. And they moved out, and 20 minutes later, they blew up the only functioning emergency department in Gaza, and the only functioning ICU unit in Gaza. The Americans blew it up, and they've still managed to get away with winning over, at least neutralizing, the majority of the population in America and Europe, who seem to be completely oblivious to the barbarities carried out by Israel on a day-by-day basis, and still come out with this nonsense of, whenever you mention the killing of the people in Gaza, they say, what about October the 7th? On October the 7th, the Israelis, when they say that there were 1,200 people were killed, the Israelis killed a significant proportion of those people killed on October the 7th were killed by the Israelis themselves, so that they would not, yes, by the Israelis themselves. It is extremely well documented. There are, you might remember, images of large numbers of cars, supposedly around the festival, that have been blown up by helicopter gunships. Hamas has no helicopter gunships. The Israelis, I say it, slip of the tongue, the Americans, not that bad a slip of the tongue. The Israelis went in there and they just blew them up, because they have this thing called the Hannibal Directive, which means if a Palestinian group captures an Israeli, you must kill the Israeli so they don't become hostages. And if you don't think that's true, well, look at the policy now. They don't want the hostages freed. They want to keep on fighting. There's something like, they reckon, 24 hostages left. The Palestinians made a deal to hand over hostages for hostages. The Israelis released some hostages. By the way, there's no talk about how they became hostages. How comes there's so many thousands of Palestinians who are being released compared with Israelis being released? How the hell did they end up in prison indefinitely, without charge, without trial, many of them children and women? How many people? They talked about, I remember Piers Morgan, they were killing babies. They put a baby in the oven, they said. A baby in the oven. They raped all these women. That's what they kept saying. Don't you remember when the Palestinians released as part of the hostage deal? Only a month or two ago, when they were being released, the Hamas fighters were there with their guns. And they had signs behind them. And then they would bring up soldiers, children, women onto the stage. And they'd be high-fiving with each other, right? The Palestinians who had captured these people high-fiving with the captives. The captives giving them a hug. One of the soldiers gave the hug to the Hamas fighters. So much for the animosity. They've obviously been treated as well as you could possibly imagine in a war zone where the Americans, the British and the Israelis have been slaughtering something like 50,000 people, of which some 2/3 are women and children. And then they said, what about the baby who was put in the oven? So one baby in an oven, which is a full story, compared with, let's say, 20,000 children blown up, heads knocked off, every single day on television. And no one gives a shit. Or better said, it looks like no one gives a shit. And then they're trying to create a cultural war around this issue, because they know a large number of people in Britain and in Europe are saying, we're sick of all the Muslim immigrants. That's what they say. Subterraneously, that's what they're saying. We're sick of Muslim immigrants. A lot of them don't know who's a Muslim, who's not a Muslim. They don't know who comes from Indian subcontinent, who's a Hindu and who's a Muslim. They don't really understand much about Islam, except they have this idea that Islam equals terrorism, and Islam equals barbarity, Islam equals backwardness, and therefore they say these are subhuman. And when the Israeli minister turned round at the beginning of the attack on Gaza by the Israelis, he said, the Palestinians are human animals. and we must eradicate them. And that view has become quite widespread, at least in practice, in the minds of people in Western Europe, multiplied and exacerbated by the campaign in the mass media to present this as an equal conflict. Hamas doesn't have an army, Hamas doesn't have a navy, Hamas doesn't have an air force, Hamas doesn't have the weaponry. Israel has got the weaponry, it's backed by America, it's backed by Europe, and it's backed by Britain. With your money is used to blow those people up. Your taxes are used to blow those people up. And so when they talk, all their humanitarian rights in Ukraine, the freedom of the Ukrainians. And there was a time when they were all going on about the Uyghurs in China. Oh yeah, but what about the Uyghurs? They're all in prison in China. When they blow up the Palestinians on a daily basis, it's like accident. The Israelis have admitted they accidentally blew up a load of ambulances, accidentally blew up thousands of children, accidentally blew up a school. That's the arguments these people are making. And people are sucking it in through, but it's the same propaganda and mass media lies that they were telling during COVID. You're supposed to believe all the nonsense they say then. Line up this way, stand in a line, stand 2 meters apart, wear a mask, be wary of your neighbour, go for your vaccination, like a bunch of guinea pigs. But even guinea pigs, you don't stand 2 meters apart. You can never train an animal to do what they did to us. You couldn't train any dog to do what they did to us. But I remember, disease, that was the disease. No, but you're not getting it. That was the disease. The disease was the mental attitude that your neighbour is your enemy.
What about the actual disease that's killing people?
Well, there was a trial. There was a trial known as the Challenge Trial, carried out by Imperial College. 36 healthy young people like yourself, 36 young people like yourself were taken to Imperial College in laboratory conditions, and they dropped in SARS-CoV-2 into the nasal passage. Both nasal passages, closed it for 10 minutes. Then they checked. They did PCR test. They did lateral flow test. Half of them, even though they've been deliberately had this dropped into their nasal passage, half of them showed no detectable presence of SARS-CoV-2. One. So 50% of people were immune to even the appearance of SARS-CoV-2 in their bodies. Second, coronaviruses are not new. There are 4 common coronaviruses that were identified since the 1960s. Every child, by the time they're 15, has had what's called an infection with a coronavirus, with one of the 4 or all 4 of the coronaviruses. The coronaviruses all look the same. They have this ball with the spikes on the outside. That's what the corona is. It's a crown. It doesn't matter. Let's deal with it first of all as people understand it. Then we can get on to the other question that you're concerned with. Now, the crown is what the body is immune against, because once you've been infected with one coronavirus, you are immune to the next one. Immunity means your body is protected. It will not die. It does not mean you won't come ill. Every couple of years you get flu, you get cold, you haven't eaten enough, you've been out late at night, you've been strained, some stress in the family, you're not very well for one reason or another, and then you catch a flu or you get a coronavirus, you come down sniffy for a couple of days, you got a temperature, maybe you got a week of illness, and then you recover. There is a phrase, an idiom, a well-known idiom that has a lot of logic to it. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It is the foundation of immunity. That's the foundation in popular consciousness of immunity. Once you have one type of illness, you are pretty much immune for quite a long period of time. We know how this functionally operates through the T-cell memory of it held in the lymph nodes and the spleen and in the bloodstream that protects you against past infections, recognizes similar infections and protects you against them by killing the infected cells. That, by the way, is also true of cancer. Cancer is also present in every one of you. So when they tell, oh my God, pre-cancerous cells, Everybody's got precancerous cells in their body. From the moment they're born, they've got precancerous cells. Your body, however, can recognize them and kill them. That's the ability of the body to protect itself. Until, for one other reason, your body is weakened and then you become susceptible to an expansion of the cancer. By the way, there is a great deal of evidence been forthcoming over the last 2 years that the Pfizer jabs, the mRNA vaccines, accelerate certain types of cancer. There's a lot of studies on that been published in the last 2 years by peer-reviewed academic journals, as they like to say. But you remember they used to, that's why I said what I said. You remember what they said to you? Oh yes, but are you a doctor? I saw this thing the other day, someone says, I am a doctor, but I'm not medical. But medical doesn't mean anything. Medical first is below a doctor. It's a medical doctor, it's an MD, they say. And it means you've received a certain training. Like a plumber receives training to do plumbing. A medical doctor receives training about the body and about medicines and about the, anatomy and stuff like that. 3-4 years of training, which can be very useful for certain types of illness. True, and of course the government's been playing on this in a mistaken way. It is also true that there is a massive over-medicalisation of illnesses. Over-medicalisation. So a lot of people, they receive cocktails of drugs. Cocktails of drugs. By the time they're 60, they're taking like 10 pills a day. They've never done studies on the interaction between all these pills and in the interaction between all those pills and people. Not as many as you. I should be taking. How many should I be taking is the question. And then they showed that around the third largest killer in the Western world is medical drugs. Officially prescribed medical drugs. The third largest killer. It may well be higher. It may well be higher. So these lies that they tell at every level in society, the COVID thing was the extremity of it, where they pushed it into our everyday lives at such a level that it affected how everyone behaved to everyone else. That was the most extreme form. And now we've got the external, the reason why people don't complain about Gaza and Ukraine is because it was the externalization. We had the internal COVID problem, which ended with the rise of the Ukraine war and then the rise of Gaza. And they seem to be, oh, it's over there. And the way it manifests itself is that, oh, well, we're free now to do what we like. But of course, later, the same methods they're using in Gaza and Ukraine will be used against you. That's the point I'm making. And Donald Trump is no freedom fighter. He's a fighter for an autocracy. He's a fighter for a plutocracy, as you said, to correct me. He's a fighter for the elite and the oligarchy who want to overthrow the government of China and establish an American-style colonized state in China that would serve the... Then they'd suddenly take the tariffs away. If the Chinese was a pliant government, they'd say, oh, okay, no tariffs, no problem. Export all you can if our companies are able to... And of course, the proof of the pudding is that it's exactly what they've done. Donald Trump said, massive tariffs on China, except on computers and mobile phones. Why? Because they're American mobile phones and American computers. That's why. Manufactured in China. No.
Are they going to manage?
Huh?
Are they going to manage?
Who's going to manage? The Chinese will do fine. The Americans will have a big problem. There's no doubt about it. The Chinese will do fine. The Chinese won't be affected by this because actually over many years, the China was exporting its goods to America, making a couple of American dollars and then putting the money in the US treasuries. They don't have to do that. If people are prepared to buy in yuan and the Chinese receive yuan for their payments and people can buy from them, then they can create an alternative balance of power in the world economy.
Suspended for 90 days, or is that just the rest of the world?
I think that's, I don't know. I didn't follow that. One final question.
We were talking about the cancer being in us from the start, and you said there was a...
You can hear it.
You
You
talking
can hold over.
Turbo cancer, yeah.
about parasites. Because they're saying now that cancer are actually cancerous parasites and some kind of fungal infections and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know enough to make a comment, so I won't. But you know, I know there was a lot of discussion recently. I don't know. I don't know enough to make an informed comment on that. I'll study that one day, but that's for another day when I've got a bit of time, yeah. Okay, ladies and gents, I've been speaking for a while. Thanks very much. Take a break.
Please, Corbin.